record. I'm going to put that in front, and I'm going to blow that up. And here we go. We ready? All right. So like I said, we're going to go a little quicker here. Observation contentions, obviously, those are part of an affirmative case, right? It's different because sometimes you'll see observation and sometimes you'll see contention. It's like uniqueness and brink. They use them synonymously, but they're really not the same. If I contend something versus observe something, there's different, right? One is an action. I contend this is true, and I'm going to prove it. Whereas an observation is, I've observed something and I'm sharing it with you, okay? Now, in the debate world, it used to be quite a different thing. If I was trying to prove something, like your solvency, is that an observation or is that a contention? Your solvency evidence.
Contention.
It's contending, right? Because I'm contending that my plan solved. But you don't see this in debate anymore, so I'll just tell you, let it slide. But there is a difference, right, between an observation. An observation would be inherency, wouldn't it? I observe this is what's going on, okay? So there is a difference, but most people either write observations for all of them or contentions for all of them. Generally, that's what follows, a stock issue follows that, right? Observation 1, inherency. Observation 2, harms. Observation 3, solvency, right? So generally, they preview a stock issue. The subpoints are the headings underneath that. So if I have 3 or 4 harms, right, it'll go boom, boom, boom. When I do harms, generally if it's an ABC, the C is usually significance. So I'll have this is bad, this is bad. Usually the C card is it's really bad. Usually my significance comes there. And then if you want to break it down further, you go observation 1, which is usually a Roman numeral, then A, and then you use numbers underneath that, 1, 2, 3, 4. In some cases, get that specific, okay? And we call those littles. So if I was to read it in a round, I would say observation 1, subpoint B, little 1, okay? So littles are the numbers that follow subpoints, okay? A brief, what's a brief? It's not a pair of underwear. What is a brief? This is the class participation part of class. What is a brief?
It is.
You guys wrote a brief.
It's a case. It's like what it's about. Like it's a topic.
You're getting close.
Like
a negative brief is what? Or a second affirmative brief. It's a single argument, right? The opponent said this. My response to that is blank. Here's the evidence. Here's the analysis. Here's the impact. That single piece of evidence, that single argument or response is called a brief, okay? A block is a collection of briefs, right? If you think about your death penalty block, it is a series of arguments or briefs. I'm gonna have you put one more thing in here. Below block, I want you to write the word shell. A shell, S-H-E-L-L. This is also another name for a formal argument. So if we have a T shell, it's our topicality argument. Shells usually refer to not standard arguments. For example, minor repair, that's not really a standard signpost tag evidence analysis impact form, is it? So like minor repair would be shell, right? Your vagueness arguments, your E-spec, your F-spec, those aren't really blocks or briefs, they're a shell. Does that make sense? So if it's not in the standard signpost tag evidence analysis impact format, but it's still an argument, a formalized form, single argument, it's called a shell, okay? Attitudinal inherency. Explain to me how that plays a role in debate. And we've talked about it. How does attitudinal, because that's our inherency, right? Usually if they ask you what's your inherent what? What's your inherent barrier, right? Is inherent barrier a stock issue? No. Negatory. Do I have to have an inherent barrier? No, I don't. But somehow, somewhere, somebody teaches you have to have it. So if that judge happens to come from a school of thought that you have to have an inherent barrier, we say that our inherent barrier is what? Attitudinal inherency. In other words, the attitude is such that they haven't passed it yet. That's why. I don't know what's going on in the mind of a congressman or a senator, right? The attitude, that's what's our barrier. Because they're going to say, well, there's got to be something blocking it. No, not really. That's not a stock issue. I just have to prove inherency. The status quo is either doing nothing to stop it or causing it. I don't have to tell you why they're not doing anything about it. Maybe they don't want to. Maybe they don't like me. I don't know, right? Inherent barrier is that. It's that fake thing that they ask for that isn't real, which is, why haven't they done your plan yet? What is stopping them? It is not a stock issue. So these two go hand in hand. All right, I'm going to scroll down and then come back up the other side. Okay. The next section is part of your plan. So if you just want to write above the word workability, write the word plan, and then kind of bracket in workability, enforcement, funding, mandates, plan, planks, fiat. All of those kind of go hand in hand with plan. So that's basically what we're discussing. You don't see a lot of this anymore, but sometimes you can. The first thing is workability. My plan has to actually be workable, right? For example, if I said, hey, there's a lot of prisoners, so what we're going to do is we're going to have aliens come down and zap them with goodness rays so no one is a criminal anymore, and then we'll release everybody to society and get rid of prisons. Now, sounds like a great idea, but it's not very what? Workable. Here's where I think we are falling short. Has anybody hit the negative that is running abolish prisons yet?
Yeah.
All right.
Well,
Abolish prisons. Conception. Here's their concept. Prisons are bad. They're this industrialized complex used to trap the poor and minorities in this country into a cycle they can't escape. The evidence is good that once you enter the prison system, your life is very difficult. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be successful, but man, it's stacked against you. And so what they say is this whole system is rigged. And so they say, get rid of the prison industrial complex. PIC is what they call it, right? Conceptualized, that sounds okay, right? But here's where it really fails. Is that workable? Because if we release every prisoner, what happens?
They're bad.
The crime
Okay.
rate.
where are they going to go?
Where are they going to go? What's the crime rate? We're talking how many million? 2.5 million?
A lot.
Or rehabilitation?
Yeah.
Rehab centers. How workable is that?
Not very.
Even if it was, that's still basically in prison.
Well,
They have
the
to go to rehab?
centers, they'd be overpopulated.
And are they all drug addicts? Maybe I'm just a murderer and I like it.
What do we have for murder?
I like killing people.
They said that some people would go to rehab centers for life. I was like, what's that? Where are you gonna get the money?
And that's not rehab. That's if I'm a sociopath, which means I cannot be cured, I go to rehab for life. You know what they call that? Prison, by a different name. So workability, that's one thing I think we have to think about. When somebody runs a plan, it's like, that's great. Okay, so you're going to mandatory federal training of police officers. How workable is that to put in place a training system for every cop in this country? And tell me that that's going to work. See the problem? It's not very workable, is it? This is where state's counterplan comes into play. States could probably more likely handle it. Kansas handling Kansas officers, doesn't that make more sense? They could probably do that, right? Versus the federal government saying Kansas. So workability it's one of those things we forget about, but you can actually make an argument that their plan is not workable, which means they don't have solvency. Takes out stock issue. Does that make sense? Enforcement, who's going to make them do it? This is our E-spec, right? Enforcement spec is a strong argument. Who's going to make it? Here's the problem with this year's topic. I think when they wrote this topic, it's the federal government should deal with criminal justice reform. So if you do it in police, are there federal police officers? Yes. FBI, right? CIA, Capitol Hill Police, right? Are there federal crimes? Yes. Is there a federal prison system? Yes. So anybody who handles those are uber topical, I think, right? I think you could run a case that says doing something in federal prisons, and I would argue I'm the only topical case. Because once you get outside the federal prison, federal police officers, right? Are you topical really? Because can the federal government dictate what gets done? What's their enforcement? How does the federal government make sure that local cops get training? Are they gonna appoint a person to stop by every police station and say, hey, did you do it? What'd you get from it? Are you better now? Are you not gonna beat people now, right? Are you a good cop now? Well, you guys see the problems? So enforcement, mandates are this. What's a mandate?
It's like a new rule.
It's a law.
That's gonna be required.
It's what your law is. Your mandate is your law. So what you're passing, so our mandate for the death penalty is what?
Will be abolished.
That's a law. I'm passing a law. So a mandate is the law that you're doing. Okay. Plan planks, that's how you do it. Plan plank 1 usually is mandates. Plan plank 2 is usually, these are planks, right? Think of them like planks to a ladder, right? Plan plank 1 is usually your mandates. Plan plank 2 is usually your enforcement and funding if it needs it. And we usually use normal mean. What does fiat mean?
Should, not would.
That my plan
Should.
pass, not that it
Would.
would pass, right? Or will pass. I don't care if it will pass. It's not going to pass. So, should. It should, right? I'm not going to get A's, all A's this year, but I should. Rebuttals, that's the summation, right? It's the summation of the round. The most important thing to pull in rebuttals is what? What do I tell you in rebuttals?
All your arguments.
Because if what?
If it didn't happen.
If you don't do it, it didn't happen. You wasted all your good efforts. You can be the most amazing speaker, but if you don't answer and pull your own arguments into rebuttals, they did not happen. How many times have we won rounds this year because we did that and they didn't? A lot. A lot of rounds we won because of that. Prep time, how many minutes you get
8,
this year? How many are you going to get next year?
Like 6.
probably 5.
5. Once they get off the computer, they kind of built in 8 minutes so you could have some tech time this year. They may keep it at 8. Who knows? Flow is what? What is the flow?
Tracking your opponent's arguments.
This is something between this year and next year, guys, you need to improve on, right? The better you flow, I can't tell you how much easier it makes debate. You can either use that computer template I gave you, okay, or do it by hand, which a lot of people still like to do it by hand, okay? That way they can have their computer there when they go up to speak and still have their flow to do this, okay? If you have it on your computer, then it makes it difficult. You'll notice some people are using 2 computers now, one for their evidence and one for like their flow and their speech. They can write their speech, get their flow up over there, and be able to pop up evidence back and forth like that, okay? A flow is basically the argument itself. It's valuable, okay? Critiques, we haven't talked a lot about critiques. I usually don't even address them at the novice level, but it did show its ugly head this year in the form of abolition of prisons, right? That's the main one you saw this year. But a critique, just for your definition point, is an argument that is beyond the topic. I'll give you a couple examples that will help address this. Let's say during the debate, I use language that the other team feels is not appropriate. For example, one year it was about the Middle East, and have I told you guys that they were using Taliban? Have I told you this? They were using Taliban and Al Qaeda in the same way,
Oh, yeah.
right? And they ran a language K that, hey, punish them because they're basically mixing religion with terrorists and saying that this religious organization, punish them, right? I could run a critique if they used maybe that they're looking at this whole topic through the lens of a masculine lens. You can run, there's something called a fem K. From a feminist point of view, I feel like we're being left out. Obviously, if you're a male, I would not run the feminist K. But from a female's point of view, you can say, look, this whole system that we're looking at is from a patriarchal, male-dominated system. And that in and of itself, all your solutions are basically from this broken system. And so we should reject the affirmative based on the fact that it's looked at through the wrong lens. You guys see how these are bigger than the topic? Abolish all prisons. It's not saying we need to do reform. We're just saying, look, prisons in and of themselves are horrible. The whole system is bad. All you're doing is tweaking an already bad system, so you're really not fixing anything. The only way to fix it is to tear it down and build it back up from scratch and see what happens. Those are critiques, right? They're arguments that are beyond the topic. It's big picture arguments, okay? You didn't make that follow me.
Oh.
That was supposed to follow me. Come on. All right. Counter plan. You're offering something other than the affirmative. It's usually on the negative. Not usually it is on the negative, right? It says this. Look, here's what they're doing. I think that's not right. It's not working, or it works, but this will work better. The best example is the state's counter plan, right? But when there's international topics, which is every 3 years, sometimes they'll say the United States should. Other counterplans would be the UN should, right? Or NATO should. Right? The European Union should. So they'll throw other counterplans out there when it becomes an international topic. In other words, they're saying, yeah, something needs to be fixed, but you got the wrong person doing it. This ties back into justification, right? Our justification says who should be doing it? Federal government. We're saying no. So it's really a justification argument, right? They didn't meet their justification burden. So I'm offering a counterplan. A perm is this. A perm is do the counterplan. This is an affirmatives luxury. And there's a lot of perm theory out there. I'm just going to give you the basics. It says we should be able to do my plan and the counterplan together. And if we do them together, the net benefit, which is, remember we talked about this, the disad goes away. If it doesn't go away, then I cannot perm them. All right? I'll give you a good example I talked about the other day, which I think is a pretty good counterplan. Now you tell me what's wrong with it using the language I just said. What's the root problem of crime, do you think? Why do you think crimes are committed? What's the root problem? People are sick. Do you think that's it?
Or maybe like inequality.
Inequality how?
Between like races, like people being rich, so they don't have to commit
Maybe not
crime.
race, but what? Socioeconomic status.
That.
Could we argue that poverty is a root cause of crime? I steal things because I don't have them. Perhaps I use drugs because I'm sad about my life. If my life was, now that doesn't mean rich people don't use drugs, right? But there's a reason that in poor areas, crime is what? Higher. So do you think in a debate round, instead of saying abolish prisons is my critique, I could say, look, the root cause of all of this, you can do plea bargaining, all this stuff, but you're not solving the root problem. The root problem is poverty. And I think it was Trump and some of the old school rappers wanted to put like trade schools in inner cities because they figured, hey, you're not going to go to college. These aren't college-bound kids. In some inner cities, African-American males, the dropout rate is 50%. It's insane, right? So what are the prospects? And their idea was this, I think, was to put like trade schools like plumbing, electric, right? I just hired a plumber, $70 an hour, right? Mechanic, $87 an hour in Hutch. Right?
Whoa.
I'm going to college. I'm going to trade school.
Welding. Welders, if you're an underwater welder down on the coast, you make 100 plus an hour.
Sheesh. So you're dealing with electricity.
In the water, yeah. And you can only go down. My point is this. So the idea was to put trade schools in there and give them a future. Great idea, I think, right? Of course, like all great ideas, it'll probably never materialize. But it's a great idea, I thought. So couldn't I run that in a debate round? Hey, root cause, poverty, you're not doing anything. Counter plan, trade schools in inner cities. At least I'm doing something that's going to work, okay? Could we do that in the debate round this year?
Yeah.
Yes. But what's wrong with it?
How are you going to fund the trade?
No, not that.
No, it's
Using
not.
what I just talked about here. What's wrong?
Well, if they do both, then the benefit is
Can you do both?
now.
Can't you? Can't you get rid of plea bargaining and do my plan?
Could.
The problem is it's hard not to perm my plan, isn't it? So it looks like a competitive counter plan, but the problem is they'll just perm it. So I got to find out a net benefit. I got to find a disad that links to them and not me. And the disad will probably be the more you try to fix a broken system, the further you ingrain that broken system, right? So that would still stick to them maybe. All right, conditional, unconditional. Conditional is an argument that they're going to what? Maybe keep the counter plan, maybe get rid of it, right? There's theory in theory book 5. We call it condo theory, right? It's the status of your argument. Are you going to keep it or drop it? If they say it's conditional, there's theory out there that says that's horrible, that's abusive. I'm going to spend all this time answering this argument, you're just going to drop it. Especially something like a counterplan. It takes a lot of time to defend against a counterplan, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Look at our state's counterplan answer. How long does that take you to do it? Almost an entire speech, right? Plus, you got to take out the net benefit. And what we're saying is, man, if they drop that, that's unfair. If you're going to run a counterplan, you got to stick with it, right? So conditional means they may drop it. Unconditional means what?
They're going to keep.
They're going to keep it. They're going to keep it. Believe it or not, there's theory out there that says unconditional arguments are bad too. I don't think that anyone's going to buy that, all right? We haven't talked about this, so I'm just going to give you a blip. A pick counterplan is to do their entire plan but change one thing. I'm going to pick one little part of it. And sometimes it's the one thing that makes it stop. So I'm going to do their plan, but I'm going to use somebody else, right? A pick counterplan would be to do their exact plan but use, if it was international, say do the exact plan but use NATO. I'm going to do their plan but use NATO. States counterplan is a little bit of a pick counterplan. I'm going to do exactly what you do, but I'm going to do it in the States. Okay? So a pick counterplan is you take one small part and just change who's doing it. That's it. And you run their exact same plan. Minor repair, if they're just tweaking enforcement or funding, it's negative ground. In other words, they lose inherency. They're taking the status quo and tweaking it a little bit. That is not a substantial criminal justice reform. So minor repair usually ties to a T, substantial. And guys, the word substantial is in the topic every year. Substantial or substantially is in the resolution every year, okay? So minor repair, if you're gonna run minor repair, you also have to run what?
Substantial.
T on substantial. Okay, they go hand in hand. Pilot program, we don't have that these year, but we do it for the plea bargaining case. The plea bargaining case says in Alaska, they got rid of plea bargaining and it didn't clog the courts. That's a pilot program. In other words, if my solvency, I can show where it's worked somewhere else, that's pretty good solvency, right? Because most of our solvency is just cerebral. A pilot program says, hey, this was implemented and it worked. I wish it wasn't in Alaska where hardly anybody exists, but at least it's a pilot program. We tried it, we got rid of plea bargaining, and courts didn't clog. We still lose on court clog for plea bargaining for some reason. All right. I'm going to go down to the spec arguments now. These we know, right? Our spec is what? It's the only one probably we don't have. It's the resolution specification. Let me tell you what it is. It's really a bill. A lot of times people will propose, pass HR 55421. And how long are bills usually? Pages and pages and pages and pages, right? And so here's what we say. Do you have a copy of the bill? And then usually they say no. And then you'll say, how's a judge supposed to vote on a bill they don't get to read? And then if they do have a copy of the bill, usually it's really long and you say, how is it fair that within 8 minutes of prep time, I'm supposed to read the entire bill, the judge still doesn't get to see the bill, to pass a bill that you don't see? That's our spec. It's too vague. Does that make sense? So the resolution is a bill. So if they pass a bill, you run our spec. And that's kind of the way you run it is, look, there's too much to a bill to pass. And then the other specs, the only ones I'm going to talk, F spec, we know what that is, right? Their funding's too vague. E spec, their enforcement's too vague. A spec is They don't know who's going to actually implement this, who's the agency that it's running through. Is it the Department of Justice? Sometimes they leave this off, right? Who's the agency? G-spec, I-spec, ignore. Just mark those off. I am going to talk about O-spec really quick. We actually don't have a copy of this, but let me talk about it real quick because it's fun. We used to run spec arguments. I kind of brought it to Southeast Kansas a little bit, and people hated them. They're basically just plan attacks, right? Solvency attacks. So people started running really specific cases against us. So they would, detail everything. So we ran over specification, that they have specified so many little details that there's absolutely no way a negative team could research every one of those little plan planks. They have over specified their plan, and we would run O-spec, and we would run rounds, and they would hate us for that. But that's O-spec. You guys understand the concept of it? People that get so specific. For example, in our death penalty case, don't we now say that we will take away all federal funding? What federal funding is that? How much is that? Will states react? See how that opens up a lot more burden for the negative to research because they've overspecified. Somebody could run O-spec on us. All right, jargon. The only reason I do these is so you know when you see it, all right? And I want you to use this stuff, okay? I want you to use this terminology. The more you can kind of put this in your vocabulary and use it, you sound more like a debater, and it builds your ethos as a debater, okay? So cold conceit means what? Anyone? I've talked about it.
It's like kind of giving up.
They drop an argument. If they drop an argument, instead of saying they dropped the argument, I'm going to say they concede, right? Silence is compliance. You ever heard that? So I don't say they dropped the argument. I said they cold conceded. In other words, if you make an argument, they never even touch it throughout the entire debate. Now, if it's a rebuttals, they've touched it and then they don't bring it back up, I say they dropped it. But if they never address it, I use the word cold concede. They must cold concede. In other words, without any doubt, they agree with us, okay? Rhetoric of the card or the warrant. Put that beside rhetoric. Put warrant. That's basically, in your own words, what's the card really saying, okay? So you can say the rhetoric of this card is saying, or the warrant of this card is. Those are used synonymously, and both of them are very debatey and sound good, okay? Joshua, are you writing all this stuff down? Or did you already have it? I don't see your pen moving is why. I'm assuming you already did it? Huh? You're gonna have, guys, this is due. You understand this, right? You're gonna have to turn this in? Okay. Cross apply. All right. This is your best friend in a debate round. If somebody runs two disads, right? And I use the trump cards to take out the uniqueness. Do I have to read the trump card twice? No. I take that and I cross apply it to both. It's when I'm going to use my same argument for several things, right? So I may make a statement that applies to several arguments. I don't have to reread that card, especially if I'm on the affirmative and they read evidence against me. Do I have to read backup evidence if their card is not better than my initial card? No. I'm just going to cross-apply my observation 1 subpoint A card, my 1AC. Cross-apply it, okay? So cross-apply means to take an argument that I have or an evidence that I have and apply it to more than one argument. Group. Sometimes they'll make several arguments that I can group together. For example, if they're going to make like vagueness arguments, right? So let's say they run E-spec and F-spec. Basically, I'm going to say group these together. They're running a planned vagueness argument, and I can answer it all in one. In high-speed rounds, guys, where there's a lot of stuff going on because they're reading really, really fast, you better learn. There's a saying I developed many years ago. It's group, cross-apply, or die. In other words, they're going to speed you right out of the round. You've got to learn to group arguments. I'm going to answer these 5 arguments. They're basically saying the same thing with one response, right? If they run 3 disads, I'm going to group those disads, and I'm going to take them all out at the uniqueness level by cross-applying my Trump uniqueness cards. You guys see how you do that? You don't have time to answer 3 individual ones. You don't have time. Okay? So group, cross-apply, or die. Offense versus defense. Okay, this is a big difference. What time are we out of here? 26?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let me cover these real quick and then we'll come back to this one. Exacerbate means to make worse, to spread. right? If you exacerbate the problem, you make the problem worse. Mutually exclusive. I've used that term before. What does that mean?
Exclusive.
Mutually exclusive. That's going to take a little more explanation. Comparatively advantageous. When do we use that? When they don't run a
Counterpoint.
disad. When they don't run a disad, we're always going to be comparatively advantageous. Remember this, because my affirmative plan is always going to have some advantages, right? If they don't run a disad, what they're telling the judge is if you pass our plan, nothing bad will happen. We are always, man, these words, guys, star this. This needs to come out of your mouth if they don't run a disadvantage. We are comparatively advantageous at the point they don't run a disad. Word for word, you should say that in rebuttals if they don't run a disad, or they drop it in rebuttals. Thwart means to stop. Empirically proven means that there's actual evidence that it's been tried and trued. It's been done before. Empirical evidence is evidence that has happened before, right? It's happened before, and it worked out like I said it is, and that's our evidence. Kick it means that we're going to kick it, we're going to get rid of it. You just say kick it. Warrant is exactly what we talked about. It's the rhetoric of the card. So you can say, see rhetoric of card. Time suck is something I run to make you spend time on, right? On purpose. And then usually I kick it. But if somebody else runs a time suck on me, I want to run my abuse argument that they wasted my time. It's abuse. It's standard is fairness, and the voter is decreases education. Remember that from yesterday. Not yesterday, Monday. Hegemony or hegemony, depending on who you're talking to. It's referred to as hedge in debate rounds. You don't see it a lot this year, but you could. But you definitely see it in international years. It's U.S. influence and power on the world. So it's our influence. And there's soft power and hard power. Hard power is what, do you think? The United States is hedge. What is our hard power? What is our hard influence? Military. What is our soft power? Negotiations, treaties, aid, right? These are tools that we can use to influence other countries. Soft power, hard power. So under hedge, right? Soft power, hard power, kind of put a brief explanation of that. I'm going to stop right there. Okay. Any other questions? All right. If you didn't get a chance to fill those out, fill those out. I will collect these up next week. All right. Let me make sure I get this. Do that. I'm going to go ahead and end. I'm going to